Leora Vale vanished on the night of her wedding. Merrick Halburn buried the truth. But the bride he thought he'd silenced came back, and on their first night together, she saw his face, and something ancient inside her woke up. In the northern village of Elms here, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. Surrounded by thick pine forests and icy rivers, the town was known for its simplicity and silence. It was here that Leora Venn had spent her entire life, growing up in a modest orphanage run by the Sisters of Elmshire. The villagers knew her as the quiet girl who never caused trouble, always seen walking through the meadows with a book in her hands or helping in the chapel with the elder nuns. Her presence was gentle, almost ghost-like, as if she belonged more to the wind and the snow than to the world of people. One winter evening, everything changed when a letter arrived for Leora, an invitation to meet a man named Merrick Halburn. No one in the village had ever heard of him. He was said to be a wealthy man from the Highlands, a reclusive figure with no known relatives or background. Rumors quickly spread that he had seen Leora during one of his rare visits to the monastery and had been captivated by her. Within weeks, arrangements were made for their wedding. Some villagers whispered about the odd nature of the match, but the sisters saw it as a miracle. An orphan girl being offered a future of stability and wealth? It felt like something out of a fairy tale. Leora herself didn't object. She didn't smile, but she didn't resist either. Her expression remained neutral, as if she were drifting through a dream. The wedding was scheduled to take place in a private chapel outside the village near a frozen lake surrounded by dark woods. It was to be a small ceremony with only a few witnesses, no music, no celebration, just vows exchanged under candlelight. The night before the wedding, everything seemed normal. Leora had dinner with the sisters, spent a few quiet moments in prayer, and retired to her room early. But by morning, she was gone. Her bed was untouched. The window was slightly open, even though the wind outside was brutal and snow had begun to fall. The sisters searched every corner of the building, but there was no sign of her. The village was alerted, and a group of townsfolk set out on foot to search the nearby forest and the lake. What they found was haunting. Near the edge of the frozen lake, tangled among the reeds and snow, was Leora's Vale. There were no footprints leading to or from the site. The ice was solid, undisturbed. Her shoes were found neatly placed beside a tree, as if she had calmly undressed and walked into the woods barefoot. A search dog led the group in circles before giving up. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. News of her disappearance spread quickly. The villagers were disturbed. Some blamed the groom, but Merrick Halburn denied any involvement. He appeared calm, collected, and strangely resigned. He left Elmshire the same day without explanation and was never seen in the village again. The sisters filed a report with the regional constables, but without a body, no crime could be confirmed. A brief investigation was opened and closed within weeks. Leora's disappearance faded into a cold case. The chapel remained unused. The villagers tried to forget, but her story lingered like a shadow. The veil was kept in a box at the monastery, and each winter, on the night before the anniversary of her wedding, one of the sisters claimed to hear soft footsteps down the hall, followed by the sound of a door creaking open. No one ever dared investigate. The story became legend. A whispered warning passed to new orphans who asked about the girl with the silver eyes who almost became a bride, but disappeared on the eve of her new life. Years passed, and the snow kept falling, slowly burying the memory of Leora Vin beneath layers of ice and silence. But the truth hadn't been buried. It had only gone quiet, waiting for the right moment to rise again. 2 years after Leora Vin vanished from Elmshire, the memory of her disappearance had become more of a cautionary tale than an active mystery. The sisters still spoke her name in hushed tones during evening prayers, and a few villagers claimed to see her in dreams, always standing near the frozen lake, wearing white. But life, as it always does, moved on. The chapel remained abandoned, and the veil found by the lake was now stored in a sealed box in the monastery's attic. Most believed she was dead, taken by the forest or lost to the lake's icy grip. But far away from Elmshire, in the mist-covered town of Grenshade, a strange event broke the silence. On a stormy evening, as lightning cracked across the sky, a woman appeared outside an old, crumbling church at the edge of Grenshade. She was barefoot, drenched, and shivering. Her white gown was soaked and tattered, her long black hair plastered to her face. She said nothing, only stared blankly ahead. When the church keeper found her, he thought she was a ghost. She didn't resist when authorities were called. At the local hospital, the doctors examined her. She had no identification, no injuries, and spoke only a few words. Her name, Leora Venn. It didn't take long for the name to reach Elmshire. The sisters were stunned. How could it be? Leora hadn't aged a day. She looked exactly as she had the night before her wedding, with the same cold stare, pale skin, and silver eyes. A regional constable was assigned to escort her back to the village. She offered no resistance, no explanation. She simply followed silently, holding tightly to the edge of her torn gown as though it grounded her to this world. When she arrived in Elmshire, no one knew how to react. The villagers watched from their windows as the car passed through the snow-covered streets. Some were afraid, others curious. The sisters embraced her, but she gave no sign of recognition. Her room was prepared again, but she did not sleep in her bed. She stood by the window each night, unmoving, watching the forest. Her presence felt like a ghost had walked back into flesh. There were whispers among the villagers. Was it really her? Or something that looked like her? The most unexpected twist came days later, when a letter arrived for Merrick Halburn. Leora, he had disappeared without a trace after the wedding was canceled, but the letter found him through his estate in the Highlands. Within a week, he returned to Elmshire, arriving in a black carriage with no escort. He stepped out wearing a long coat, his expression unreadable. When he saw Leora, he showed no surprise, no questions were asked. He accepted her return as if nothing had ever gone wrong. In a matter of days, plans for a second wedding were arranged. This time, there would be no guests, no announcements, just a quiet ceremony at the Holborn estate. Some of the sisters protested, suggesting more time was needed for Leora to recover. But Merrick insisted, and once again, Leora did not object. She wore a new gown, though still pale as a sheet. Her wrist bore a strange, faded scar, shaped like a burn that no one remembered her having before. On the night of their wedding, under a sky thick with storm clouds, Leora entered the Halburn estate as Merrick's bride. The house, a sprawling stone manor on a cliffside, was as dark and imposing as its owner. The ceremony was short, held in the candlelit library, and immediately after, Merrick led Leora to the master bedroom at the end of a long, creaking hallway. What happened that night remained a mystery. But by morning, everything had changed. The maid found Leora unconscious on the floor, her hands clutching her chest. Her heartbeat was rapid, her skin clammy. The doctor was summoned. Leora was placed in bed, unable to speak. Her eyes remained open, fixed on the ornate ceiling above her. When asked what had happened, she gave no answers, only stared into the distance, breathing shallowly, as if she had seen something her mind could not accept. She had seen Merrick's face in a moment of flickering light, and her heart had trembled.
Leora remained unconscious for 3 days. The manor staff tiptoed through the halls, speaking in whispers, unsure of what had occurred behind the locked bedroom door. Merrick Halburn rarely left her side, pacing the room as if waiting for her to speak or scream. But when she finally opened her eyes, she said nothing. Her gaze wandered aimlessly, never settling on one thing for too long. The doctor called it shock, perhaps from stress or sudden trauma, but no one could explain the reason. Leora had walked into that room a bride and emerged something else, silent, cold, and distant. What unsettled the staff even more was what began to happen the very next night. Leora refused to sleep. She sat up in bed, writing on scraps of paper she tore from old books. She scribbled numbers and names, strange dates, unknown places, and words that made no sense to anyone else. At first, they were dismissed as ramblings of a distressed woman. But then she began carving the same things into the walls with pieces of broken porcelain. Over and over, she repeated a single name, Brannick, and marked a symbol resembling a circle with a slash through it. Merrick, deeply disturbed, ordered the maids to remove anything sharp or breakable from her room. He locked away every mirror in the house. He forbade the servants from entering her chamber without his permission. The manor, once still and silent, now echoed with tension. Even the light seemed dimmer, as if the house itself was sinking into something dark. But Leora remained alert, aware of everything. One afternoon, while Merrick was away in the study, she managed to escape her locked bedroom using a hairpin she had hidden beneath her pillow. She wandered the halls barefoot, her gown trailing behind her like smoke. She found a hidden door near the staircase, behind a large oil painting of a woman in a bridal gown. The door led to a narrow passage and a stone staircase descending into the depths of the manor. What she discovered beneath the house would later leave investigators speechless. The cellar was dry and cold, filled with trunks and crates, but at the far end, behind a rusted iron gate, was a collection of wedding photographs. Each one was framed, dusty, and lined up perfectly. They showed brides standing beside Merrick, women with different faces, yet somehow similar. Pale skin, dark hair, sad eyes. One photograph had no face at all. It was Leora's frame, but the image had been scratched out violently. Beside the photographs were boxes filled with burned documents, hairbrushes, jewelry, and clothing. One of the dresses matched a gown Leora had worn the night she vanished 2 years ago. It was stained with something dark and faded, something that looked like dried blood. She fell to her knees, shaking. Something inside her stirred, not a memory, but a feeling, a recognition. As if this wasn't the first time she had walked those halls or seen those photos. It was as if she had been there before, but not in the way anyone could explain. Leora returned to her room before Merrick noticed she was gone, but everything about her had changed. She no longer wrote on the walls. Instead, she began tearing pages from books and stuffing them into the fireplace, watching them burn. The staff were told to keep their distance. But one young housekeeper noticed something else Leora had started, collecting candles and placing them in a circle around her bed at night. In the center, she placed a small stone she'd found in the cellar, shaped like the same symbol she had carved into the walls, a circle with a slash. Merrick tried to confront her one evening, demanding answers. Leora didn't flinch. She simply held up a photograph she had taken from the cellar, one of the brides. Her expression was calm, detached. That night, Merrick doubled the staff patrols, locked the cellar, and placed a guard outside her room. But it was too late. The house had already begun to whisper. Leora had awakened something. And whatever she had seen in Merrick's face that night had not just frightened her, it had revealed a truth that could not be buried. The whispers inside the Halburn estate grew louder with each passing night. Leora no longer wandered the halls or carved strange symbols. Instead, she sat silently in her room, staring into the candle flames with eyes that held something ancient, something not fully human anymore. The staff spoke less. Meals were delivered but untouched. A sense of dread hung over the entire manor like fog. Even the birds stopped singing near the estate, as if the land itself was holding its breath. One morning, the gardener, who had worked at the estate for over a decade, made a disturbing discovery. In the far corner of the garden, beneath a rose bush that had recently withered, he found bones, small, delicate bones wrapped in what looked like wedding lace. He reported it to Merrick immediately. Merrick dismissed him without a word, and by nightfall, the gardener had packed his belongings and left the estate for good, refusing to speak of what he had seen. Word of the bones spread quickly through the servants. No one knew who the remains belonged to, but all feared the truth. Meanwhile, Leora's condition shifted from passive to controlled. She no longer flinched when Merrick entered the room. She observed him quietly, her hands always folded, her lips always still. What no one knew was that she had started hiding things, pages from old books, broken keys, metal scraps, and storing them behind a loose brick in the fireplace. She was preparing, though, for what? Not even she fully understood. All she knew was that she had once been erased, and she would not let it happen again. In the attic of the manor, hidden beneath a log trapdoor, was a room long forgotten by time. Leora found it late one night after following a whisper she couldn't explain. The door creaked open into a space filled with dust-covered trunks, rotted curtains, and portraits cloaked in sheets. In the center of the room was a trunk with a broken lock. Inside were journals, pages upon pages written in Merrick's careful, dark handwriting. The entries spanned nearly 20 years. Each described a bride. The names were different, but the pattern was the same. A mysterious meeting, a quick marriage, then silence, then disappearance. Some entries ended mid-sentence. Others were stained with water damage or something darker. What chilled Leora the most was the page labeled Leora V. It was dated 2 years before her disappearance. The entry ended with 3 words: phase, complete, burial. She dropped the journal and backed away. It wasn't just that she had been buried, it was the casualness of it, the cold planning. She looked around the room again and saw more photographs, not just of her, but of other women with familiar eyes, all dressed in white, all standing beside Merrick. And in the far corner, a covered mirror. She pulled the sheet off, revealing a cracked antique mirror with an ornate silver frame. But the reflection that stared back was not hers. It was her face, yes, but the eyes were black, bottomless, and the skin was grayer than flesh. The reflection reached toward her, hand trembling, as if trying to break through the glass. Leora stepped back, heart pounding. The mirror flickered, then went dark. Something inside her snapped into place. Leora returned to her room and began lighting the candles again. She placed a stone symbol at the center of the circle and began whispering in a language she did not remember learning. Her voice trembled, then deepened. The flame danced, casting moving shadows across the room. In that moment, Leora understood what had happened to her. She had died. Not fully. Not completely. Merrick had done something, bound her, buried her, but not finished her. Whatever ritual he had used was incomplete. Her body had survived, but her soul had been altered. She had been suspended between life and death, returned but hollow. Until now. Now she was waking up fully. That night, the storm returned. Thunder rattled the windows. Merrick stood at his study window, watching the rain, unaware that beneath his roof, the past was rising. Leora, no longer afraid, opened her eyes wide and saw the truth of her reflection. She was not a victim. She was becoming something else, and Merrick Halburn would soon learn that not every bride remains buried. Lightning tore across the sky as the storm reached its peak. Rain pelted the windows of the Halburn estate in sheets, and the old house groaned under the weight of thunder. Inside, the candles in Leora's room burned low, forming a perfect circle of flickering light. At its center, the stone with the carved symbol glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She was no longer afraid. The fear had drained from her long ago, replaced by purpose, by memory. She had seen the other brides in the journals, in the photographs, in the attic where time had stood still. Merrick hadn't just married them. He had used them for something dark, ritualistic, and ancient. The journals had hinted at a lineage, a bloodline that Merrick sought to preserve or perhaps control. Each bride shared a similar look because he had chosen them that way. He was recreating someone from long ago, someone who had once slipped from his grasp. And Leora, she was the final attempt. The truth settled into her bones like cold iron. She had not survived that first wedding night. She remembered the candlelight, the sound of snow tapping against the windows, the distant music from the chapel. Then nothing. only a flash of pain and the suffocating weight of earth above her. He had buried her, but the ritual had gone wrong. Something had interfered. Her soul had resisted. It had wandered, fractured, lost for 2 years, until it returned summoned again, unknowingly by Marek's obsession. Now she was back, and this time she would finish what he began. At the stroke of midnight, a loud crack echoed through the house as one of the mirrors in the east hallway shattered. The staff, those who hadn't already fled the estate, locked themselves in their rooms. Whispers filled the air, voices that didn't belong to anyone living. The portraits tilted on their nails. The candles flickered wildly. Marek sensed it immediately. He left his study and climbed the stairs to Leora's room, keys jangling in his coat pocket, eyes dark with confusion and fear. He had felt something change. The balance was off. The spell, whatever had bound Leora, was unraveling. He reached her door and found it unlocked. Pushing it open, he was greeted by cold air and the scent of burning wax. Leora stood in the center of the candle circle. Her gown floated slightly as if caught in a wind that didn't exist. Her eyes were open wide, glowing faintly. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply stared at Marek, and for the first time, he faltered. He stepped back, but the door slammed shut behind him. The room grew darker, though the candles remained lit. Shadows twisted along the walls, forming figures that didn't belong. Leora lifted her hand, and the circle of flame roared upward, forming a wall of fire. Marek fell to his knees, clutching his chest. He tried to speak, but the words failed him. The ritual had reversed. Everything he had taken from her life, breath, time, was pulling itself back. The spirits of the lost brides appeared behind Leora, their faces pale and sorrowful. They surrounded Marek, closing the space, their eyes locked on him. He tried to crawl away, but the stone beneath his hands grew hot, branding him with the same symbol Leora had carved. The walls groaned again, and the foundation trembled. In that final moment, Marek reached toward Leora, not in love, but in desperation. But there was no redemption left. Leora stepped forward, crossing the flame without being burnt. She leaned in, and though she said no words, her eyes delivered the final truth. He had created a monster, but she had become something far greater. By morning, the Halburn estate was found in ruins. The upper floors had collapsed. No bodies were recovered. Only ashes, burned stone, and a single charred wedding photograph remained. It showed Leora, standing alone in her gown, the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. Elmshire never saw her again. But villagers spoke of a woman in white, seen near the lake, standing silently under the trees. Not a ghost, not a bride,